But I never want to see kept chickens somewhere.
There it is.
Yeah, it is.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for bearing with us. We're starting a little bit late tonight because we had some technical difficulties in getting this lovely picture up on the screen. Tonight, we have another update from the flood recovery team. My name is Kevin Gates, and I'm the information officer for the recovery team. Also on stage are Chair Roly Russell from the Regional District of Community Boundary, and Mayor Frank Conrad from the City of Grand Forks, and Graham Watt, who is the now recovery manager for the recovery team. What we'll be going over tonight is starting off with some words from Roly on the rural areas that were not covered by the decision that was released this week, nonetheless, that are included in the river study. We'll then be going over the survey results, which were primarily for areas within the City of Grand Forks. We'll follow that up with some plans and an explanation on what the major infrastructure planning is based on the decisions made by Council yesterday. And then we will have some input from Urban Matters on the housing plan for both the medium and long term. So without anything more from me, we will start off with Chair Roly Russell.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Hello, there we go. Okay, and I will jump right into things in terms of, I think there is a fair bit of, I sit up here wearing the hat as the chair of the regional district, as Kevin introduced. And to do that, I have to represent the interests of everybody here. So that includes the municipalities in the regional district, and it includes the rural areas. And so it's a bit of a challenge because I also, as you know, my personal constituents are the electorate of the rural area in rural Grand Forks. And so I'll take off my hat as the chair momentarily and speak a little bit to the rural residents in terms of, I know that there's a fair bit of disappointment about finally seeing some output from that hydrology report and feeling like the recommendations that are coming out of that don't address the needs and the concerns in the rural area. So I will just take a moment to outline the process as I understand it, and then either Graham or Steve might weigh in and add to that. So to be clear, as elected officials, right, we have to make a decision based on expert opinion and then based on what the public will is. And so in this case, we look to that engineer's report and we look to the expertise from our planning departments to give us that expert opinion, and then we look at the public will. So in this case, that hydrology report was primarily mandated to focus at public safety, and public safety in the high density areas of concern. And so that's why what we saw when we finally got that hydrology report was really focused at city, mainly properties within the city boundaries, within the City of Grand Forks. And so that piece then, there is a handful of neighborhoods or individual properties in the rural areas, both in electoral area D as well as other electoral areas in the regional district. Those are identified in some kind of unique case-by-case situations that a lot of you have heard about. Those are addressed there, but not the kind of more rural groups of properties that are impacted or individual properties that have suffered significant loss. So the process there that we're looking at now, in order to come to decisions about those properties, is looking to the next iteration of a report that we would see that would be a review of the 200-year floodplain and identifying areas of high hydrological risk across the entire river system. And that report to be candid, we won't see the outcomes of that until next year, but that'll help us in guiding some of that decision making around those properties and trying to unify some of the claims that we have for those stretches of properties in the rural area. That being said, the flip side of that is a lot of the individual issues of concern in the rural area. We have had conversations with some of those property owners, 2 months ago to start those conversations. We started those conversations with Manly Meadows residents, for example. We now can use that expert opinion from the hydrology report to complement what we understood from those initial conversations to start advocating on your behalf. So a bunch of that advocacy has already happened or will happen, and some of those other pieces, we won't have that expert hydrological opinion until we see the next iteration. That doesn't stop us from advocating on your behalf to try to deliver the solutions that we already know are out there. We talked about that, I think, so Graham was just mentioning there are a number of properties that are under evacuation order still. We have had a successful EAF, so that's an application to the province for funding to help us hire a case manager. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. That case manager should start very soon. We're in the process of identifying the issues, some issues with the contract language, but that case manager will be on board to help with those particular properties that are still in evacuation order and have particularly complex cases. So that is situations like Irina's or Rick Friesen's and so on. So we do have that in play already, but there are other pieces that we've certainly recognized need action, and the hydrology report is not the expert opinion that is going to help us identify what those actions are going to be. Questions, if anybody has questions on those pieces, or unless you want to put all the questions off until later.
Let's hold questions until the question period at the end.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair Russell. We'll take a few minutes to go through the results from the survey that was put out. So if we go to the next slide. Believe it or not, we did do a revision and update of the address list before putting the survey out. We tied unique codes to the addresses so that we would know there was just kind of one coming in per property. There were some attempts to put in duplicate entries, and so we filtered those out. So we believe that the data we received back was high quality and representative. Next slide. We made a mistake right at the beginning in sending things out to incorrect addresses. We then resent letters from that batch to the correct addresses. We received lots of calls and emails from folks that had not received or were out of town and wanted a digital copy of the survey. And so we supplemented the mailing list with responses to those folks. We had an excellent response rate, so there were lots of questions about the due date, which was August 24th, and whether or not folks were going to be able to get it back in time. We had, depending on the neighborhood, between a 40 and 80% response rate, which for any survey is just beyond expectation. So the information we have is representative of folks and very high quality. Next slide. In North Ruckle, what you see on the left-hand side is just from what was returned by numbers. On the right-hand side, we have some of the comments that came in with the surveys. The vast majority of people that responded did want the buyout in North Ruckle. The second most popular answer was other. And the interesting thing about that, and not that we'll go to the next slide now, but when we go there, you'll see that the feedback, because there was a text box that went along with the other column, and it was not necessarily that they wanted to stay in North Ruckle or that they wanted a buyout. It really was kind of an other. There was a small minority of people that did want to stay in North Ruckle. Next slide. One of the things that, as the recovery team, we took away from the survey were the concerns that were expressed. So not just we want this or that, but what about mortgages and insurance? You know, is the buyout going to be quick enough that if you're paying rent and a mortgage, you're not going to get pinched there? What if your house isn't raisable? So there's tons of good feedback from the survey. This is obviously not nearly the amount of comments that we received. Next slide. South Ruckle was very split. So you can see that a slim, and not a majority, but the most of the options was to stay in South Ruckle and to build a dike there to protect the houses. Lots of folks wanted to buy out as well. And as with North Ruckle, there were also a lot of other selections along with comments. Next slide, please. And as with North Ruckle, we have all of the comments. There was a lot of concern on, why we'd want to kick people out of their houses if they weren't damaged. Again, financial concerns, just wanting more details or wanting us to have more information from folks. Next slide, please. Johnson Flats was not a choice. It was a question of, given the proposal, how well did you think it would meet your needs? So the take home from this is that it really was a mixed bag. For some folks, it was a really good proposal, and other folks, it really didn't suit them at all. So the takeaway from the results from Johnson Flats is that more discussion is needed in terms of what this means, and probably more time is needed to be spent explaining just what is going to happen in Johnson Flats. One of the reasons why it's more complicated in Johnson Flats is that it's not we're going to do this and it's going to affect the entire neighborhood. It really is a site by site. It'll change if a house is going to be raised, if that portion of riverbank is going to be armored, or if that is actually within this small buyout area in Johnson Flats. Next slide. Again, with downtown, there wasn't that big of a choice. It was, if we build a dike, is that going to suit or to make you feel safe, essentially, in investing in your property and living downtown? I think it should be clarified that neither of the large condo buildings are looking at a buyout right now. They're both looking at being behind any dike or flood protection that's installed. What you see at the bottom in terms of the not at all, i.e. a dike would not be sufficient, we interpret it to mean that a dike needed to happen, but in addition to that, there needed to be significant work on the storm sewer system and the sanitary sewer system so that there were not the backups that happened during this flood event. Next slide. So we will have plenty of time for questions in a few minutes after Graham goes over what the decisions, the infrastructure that was proposed by the river study and that council endorsed yesterday. So you'll be going through a map, which will be queued up from the folks in the back booth there, to show in detail and to really show a little bit better than any sort. I know lots of folks have the handout from tonight. This map should be a little bit better look at what the proposed dikes are, where the proposed buyout areas are, and what kind of armory might happen on the riverbanks. So we'll need Google Earth up on the computer. Okay, over to you, Graham. I will go help with the tech at the back.
We'll start with the non-map stuff first. So the process to get to a decision worked through several rounds of technical reviews, peer review, stakeholder review, and then public review of the options presented by John Dobson in his report. So it was a report developed over a series of technical meetings and memos in that process. So last week there was a kind of a review period of the final version, final draft of the report with council, and then an in-camera meeting yesterday to go through a decision process. And so what the decisions look like, I'll get to the map in a moment. Essentially there's a series of resolutions. The resolutions are a statement of the preferred outcome, the preferred, basically what will happen as a result of this floodplain management program. I should recognize that this is a preferred outcome to initiate discussions with the province and other funders about what is possible. We've already initiated some of those discussions. This reflects now the will of council and the will of the community as identified through the process that we've had. The next step are some very complex technical engineering assessments of feasibility, scoping, costing, etc., and some decisions by the province. So we'll cover that in a little bit later about how that process might look, but right now this is a real milestone. And so the non-map ones, just briefly, is that council endorses the finalized flood recovery options report for floodplain management options. And within that, there's draft conceptual alignments for dikes, for areas of buyout, for elevated roads, for these kind of strategies. Caveat, 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 it's early days, there has not been detailed engineering, and there needs to be a robust, detailed floodplain map prepared from special analysis that's being begun now. This is conceptual, but understanding how would this affect you? That was the point of the survey. The point of the council decision is to say what is possible in the province. After the endorsement here, we've already initiated the discussions with the province, releasing this information and associated information tonight and in the coming days, working with the regional district on the next steps around their decisions and their information needs, and working directly with Emergency Management DC, Provincial Disaster Recovery Branch, and all the funding bodies. So starting in Johnson Flats, so essentially this is a rural area within the city limits, and the issues that were identified in Johnson Flats were certainly flow across the floodplain and some significant erosion issues, specifically where some of the old berms along the south end had actually breached and flowed across the south end, and then the water flowed down 12th Street into the wetland, out of the wetland. A lot of the area was at risk. Those of you who were here last year in the 2017 flood, some of these areas also flooded last year, and that was a much lower magnitude flood. So the areas of buyout, there's a green blob there as a representative, but the areas of buyout that would be identified as a result of the next step are typically ones that would be at risk even in a less major flood like last year. Are they isolated? Are they impossible to protect? Are they very, very, very low lying with several feet of water? So that's kind of a consideration, public safety. Is it possible to protect those? Other areas on Johnson Flats, repair of the erosion, repair of the berming, prevention of that major overland flow of cutting off part of the neighborhood, combined with an elevating of homes, potentially an elevation of 12th Street for emergency access, and improvements in ditching and culverts and that kind of thing. So essentially that was the engineer's recommendation, to work through that process and try and create those protections, recognizing that it is a rural area and some of the properties either should be considered for buyout or special protection measures taken at the site or house level. So I expect a lot of site-by-site work to continue there. Can we move on to South Ruckle, the next point, please? So while we're pulling up South Ruckle, the direction for South Ruckle was to look at bank protection from the area just south of the beach to where the riprap is adjacent our pathway by the community garden there. And so the concept with the riprap is that whatever flood protection inland of that happens, if the river comes further inland, it will start taking out major water mains, roadways, critical infrastructure, multiple houses. And so the alignment there is to try and protect it. Now there are 4 properties. The other concept in here is a setback dike that essentially goes up 9th Street and then out 66th. And a resident asked me, is that feasible? Can it make a right angle turn? That's an illustration. The recommendation was to follow the road alignments, but essentially there's some site-specific stuff that we got to deal with what will happen with those houses. Is it possible for a house to be on the outside of a dike and have the protection from the bank protection? That's part of the follow-up work that's to begin. The other issues with South Ruckle, as you know, if you were on the south edge, the east edge, or the north edge where the water was deep and would not leave, there's sites there where it's very difficult to have a protected house. It's roughly identified on purpose with a very ugly duckling of a green blob. And then the line along the north end is to indicate that there will need to be some drainage as well. And we will get back to questions at the end. We'll have all this available. So I just want to go through all the options quickly. Don't worry about the exact location of the line. It needs the results of the hydrologic, the floodplain mapping that's going to be happening this winter. The concept is very low lying, extensive damage, 8 to 12 feet of water kind of thing. It's not really feasible to elevate those homes, and those would be considered for bioprocess. The areas where there was less water and not typically water would be easier to either not require any change or maybe elevation of home or allowing a proper rebuilding site on there once there's flood protection in place. North Ruckle, please. So the direction for North Ruckle is that there would be a dike essentially extending from the Interfor berm and going through the neighborhood, and it might use one of the existing road alignments. The direction was for, there's discussion back and forth about this, but looking at 69th and 68th Avenue, depending on the results of the engineering assessment, and then extending out past Rockwell down to the wastewater treatment plant. So the critical infrastructure piece of 68th Avenue needing to be elevated is maintaining access to the Fortis substation, the switch yard, the critical infrastructure, the lift station in the industrial area just to the south of 68th by 2nd, and access, of course, to the industry area, but primarily about that critical infrastructure that will need to remain. That is the hub for the power and the sewer in the city. But the engineers' reports and the peer review looked at between the backup from the forks and the depth of water recorded there over multiple floods in the past is that it's not recommended to remain a habitable area. So the recommendation was for a complete buyout and a change to open space, floodway, non-residential use. So that's the resolution there. We'll definitely cover more in the comments and discussion. If we can move downtown, please. And it's something just for North Ruckle, what is the timeline and that kind of thing. We'll definitely get to that. I know there's a lot of concerns about that. The location of the dike in North Ruckle is to extend from just south of Selkirk College, kind of on the outside of the spray park. There's the sewer lift station next to that, and then down along the river. Now, there was quite a bit of water down there, and so an estimation of a height of a dike that would be in that alignment is up to 2 meters or about 6 feet high. So you kind of almost need a triple that width or more for a standard dike. In some areas, there's going to be different options that'll be required, but essentially the notion is to protect the highest density of residential, to protect the core infrastructure and commercial areas of downtown, and then aligning along the east side of Riverside. And as you get up Riverside, the floodwaters were narrower, you're further away from the confluence, and there's essentially room for a flood wall there. So right now we've actually begun the process of submitting an application for funding for downtown diking to try and get this process going, because the downtown businesses, there's a lot of limbo going about what protection will be in place. The other portion of that part, it's outside of the resolutions, but the other portion of that part is improvements in storm infrastructure, including pumping to alleviate water backup, especially that might happen during a flood or a high rain event. So dealing with some persistent drainage issues is a priority. North of the highway, there's a small section of, you'll still see the berm there beside Riverside, north of the diner. There's a small section where we need to look at improvements on there. So moving to the east side of the river there, what has been recommended was in the area right around Granby Road is a dike just set back from the river. There's several houses in play there. It might not go, the alignment's not quite right here. It's, the imagery is different on Google Earth than in Lightship, but somewhere between the houses and the river, there's room for a dike. It's not an extremely high dike in there, but this has been what was recommended from the engineer, and council endorsed that approach. That would provide protection from the highway up and also allow or prevent water from backing up across the road as well. There's houses on the east side of Granby Road that are very low lying, and any in those areas would be identified for feasibility for raising. Granby Road itself, of course, was a real access problem during the flood and would need to be elevated to allow continued access north of there. Moving south of the highway to the area east of Highway 3, the endorsement of the recommendation from the engineer was to protect the riverbank. And then there's kind of two zones in there. One is tourist commercial with motels closer to the bridge, and one is the mobile home park. So closer to the confluence of the two rivers, it's really, really hard to protect. And the long-term land use that was identified for that site was to remain low, but to be open space, camping, that kind of use. For the tourist commercial properties closer to the bridge, the option that was recommended was the elevating of the two properties and allowing for either rebuilding of those existing spots or for redevelopment of tourist commercial. Now, obviously, for the mobile home park, as it is now, we'd be looking at all alternative sites that would be suitable for that, looking for land swaps or trades, et cetera, and for making sure that there was a transition for those dwellings. It's kind of a combination of tourist and residential, of commercial and residential issues that are under consideration there. Moving to Highway 3 East now, the last one. Yeah. So the direction that came from the engineer was with the low-lying area. There was a couple things that could be considered for this area, but the recommendation ultimately was that there was a possibility that it'd be better to do a buyout because of the type of flooding that happens downstream of the forks, finding relocation options for the businesses that want to continue operating, and then having potential tourist commercial or open space use in this space that was compatible with being flooded. There are site-specific alternatives that could allow interim protection and a change over time. I think what was recognized is this is the direction from council, this is the approach of what needs to be analyzed and started discussing, and we're not done the discussions yet. So this is kind of the start of the approach. So I think that's, if we zoom out kind of to the whole city level, I just want to speak briefly to not what was in the recommendation, but just Roly's considerations earlier about the rural areas. Zoom a little bit further up, please, so we can see nursery. Yeah, that's kind of a good view. As an example, we know how the water flowed across the land in Darcy Road, Nursery, Atwood, Manly Meadows. There's sections in the report that deal with land use planning, with further study required, with what can happen. There are some site-specific homes within those areas where there's current danger of erosion. There's also properties where they're very low-lying and will be very difficult to rebuild at that location. So there's kind of imminent work and midterm work at site-specific locations in the regional district. But outside of the public safety aspects of the report, we know of all the damage to agriculture, to rural roadways, to the properties, loss of land, loss of income. And this is a critical part of the economic recovery, of the land use recovery, and another chapter, another milestone of the analysis. And we know you're looking for answers on that, and we'll definitely try and take any questions tonight. Just want to recognize it is clearly in our minds. We are thinking about all that time. There's some really critical funding windows around infrastructure and dikes in the core of Grand Forks that we need to get to as the first milestone. So that's kind of the scope as it is. So I think that's everything for now. We could probably take it away.
What does the shadow represent?
Oh, the shadow across there is actually just an imagery thing from Google Earth. I don't know. They haven't fixed whatever it is. It's imagery patched together from different dates. It doesn't all look the same.
Great, thank you, Graham. So our next two presenters are from Urban Matters, and they are Lee Prévost and Eveline Marshall-Hill. And one of the things that Lee told me about Urban Matters that really stuck out is that they look for people that have different ideas. They look for the best ways to fix problems instead of going with what has always been done. So they will be up on stage to tell us about the housing strategy moving forward for the medium and long term.
Hi, thank you. So I'll just give you a quick update of where we are in the housing strategy, and go over some of the details that we've put together so far. Right now, it's really a conceptual strategy that sorry, can you hear me a little bit? I'm sorry. It's really just a conceptual strategy right now that we presented to the province. The province rightfully wanted to wait until we had finished the housing needs assessment, which was done about a week ago, which really just identifies who's going to need housing, what time frame that housing will be required, and the types of units that are required. They could be 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. Are we accommodating families or just singles? That's the whole idea. The province has given us to go ahead and talk about the housing program tonight, and we're hoping that they'll be able to announce the full program in the next coming days. So,
hi, obviously I'm Eveline, that's Lee. I'm sure I'm going to get to know a lot of you over my time here. I just relocated, as I feel it's really important to understand the people I'm seeking to help and understand your struggle as much as I can, so I'm not pontificating elsewhere and trying to solve a problem over there. So I've come in and I'm here to continue the efforts of a housing strategy that's been put forward to the province. And our first priority is going to be the people who need housing immediately, housing that's suitable for the winter. There's about 88 family units that are in need of this. And we have a couple solutions that we've put forward that might involve developing or incentivizing people to develop some secondary housing, secondary suites that they have. It could involve laneway housing, detached housing. It could involve more conventional means like modular or temporary housing. Whatever it is, it's going to be safe and it's going to be applicable to your needs as much as we can make possible. And then there's a more long-term housing recovery plan, and that's a really exciting component. I know it's probably really difficult to find excitement in a time of such great struggle, but it's such an opportunity with so much potential. And so in conversations with the city and reviewing your OCP, we begin to get a sense of the principles that you have for the type of housing that you'd like to see in Grand Forks. We understand that there were issues associated with housing before the flooding, whether it was affordability or availability. And so any solution that seeks to answer to the struggles you're experiencing because of the flood is also going to answer to those pre-existing struggles so that we can see a better Grand Forks than we saw before the flood. I'm sure I'm missing a ton, and it's going to develop as we go along, and it's going to develop with you and through conversation. That's why I'm here. We're going to be available for questions at the end of this, and we're going to be able to speak specifically to whatever I've left out as much as we can.
The only thing I'd add is that the next step for us with Urban Matters is to start talking to people who need housing immediately and those who will be needing housing long term, because we will start to craft the options that are available based on what we hear. So that's what you can expect out of us. We've been surveyed for the housing needs assessment, and now we're going to go back around and we're going to find out what experiences, what needs that you have, and that's how we're going to build our plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to Lee and Emily. Now, if there are anyone, or if there is anyone in the audience who has not already talked to the housing needs folks, you can still chat with them. So Rachel, if you want to stand up and put maybe 2 arms up in the air so everyone knows who you are, or 1 or 2. So if you have not talked to Rachel or one of her team about your housing needs moving forward, and you are looking for help with housing over the winter or next year, please do touch base. If she or her team doesn't hear from you, we don't know you exist. So please do get in touch if you haven't. That being said, they have interviewed over 390, so let's say about 400 households. So that is a good chunk of folks. We're going to move now into the question period, and as with the other times, we will have 2 roving mics. Lee will have one on this side of the room. I will have the other on that side of the room. We have until 8 o'clock for questions, so we'll keep it going as long as we can. If it looks like there's still 50 people with questions at 8 o'clock, I'm sure we can spend a little extra time to answer those questions. We will be going from one side of the room to the other side, and we will be going through folks as we hand off the mic there. If you do know that you'll have a follow-up for your question, you can just maybe whisper it to us when we hand you the mic. Otherwise, what we'll look for is ask your question, hand us back the mic so that we can get it to the next person with the question. So without anything else up here, we have our first question person.
Hello, my name is Adam Pleasant-Call. I was affected in an area that sounded like it's going to have a buyout. That being said, as far as the buyouts go, I know that we're all waiting for the government. This is all just speculation at this point until they step in and say what they're going to do for us. At that point, if they do come up and say, okay, yes, this is what we're going to do, we are going to buy out these areas, we are going to follow the City Council's recommendations, but it's going to take time for the buyout. Will there be any form of paperwork put in place or documentation that we may be able to take to our banks, any sort of legal binding documentation to be able to move forward with our lives so that we're not stuck with a place that we can't live in until the buyout's complete? Or do we know anything about that yet? Is there going to be anything in the future that we can do?
Thank you. It's an excellent question. We heard a lot about this from people in the survey results and also in the housing needs assessment that's gone over the last few weeks. So from my understanding, there's both insurance and mortgage issues and people are in limbo right now relating to that. If they're going to be bought out, I think a timeline that we could, if there's funding available for the buyout, as the City Council has proposed, and that process can proceed, the first step that would need to happen is kind of the consultation and design around a program that meets the different types of needs that have been identified. So I'd expect further consultation on that. My best hope is that that starts underway in the next 2 months, essentially, so that there is an answer as soon as possible for those areas where further study isn't needed. So I think based on the engineer's results, there's some spots that we know the process is clear and it could undertake work in the near future in terms of buyout, and I think that would be the priority. So we'll take that question forward. We've had some initial discussions with bankers within the city and with some of the insurance groups, and I'm not satisfied with our answers yet. So we're going to forge on and try and deal with that question some more. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hank Renner, I live on Riverside Drive. A couple of comments and some questions, I guess. I'm a little disappointed that Riverside residents, particularly north of the Yale Bridge, were not included in the survey. I don't know why. 27 inches of water in my basement constitutes, to me anyway, that I got flooded out. The other thing is, everybody knows, I hope they know, that water takes leaks past their resistance. And would the Boundary Flood Recovery Group agree that Cascade Falls is a bottleneck which pushes the river back up and causes it to overflow wherever it needs to go? Answer yes or no.
I'll deal with the first question first. thank you for sharing about.
This leads into something else, so I need to just a yes or no answer.
No, actually, I'm not going to give a yes or no answer. So, starting off with your first question, thank you for sharing about being disappointed about not getting a survey for that area. We know there's ongoing groundwater issues in the Riverside neighborhood that happen periodically, you know, from the judgment that was made during this process, it wasn't something that was a result of a new dike being built that a change would happen in that area. I think we're not done with dealing with those groundwater issues in the Riverside area. I think we just, we've been focusing on some of the other areas first that are affected by some of these major infrastructure issues. So that conversation isn't over, and I absolutely welcome further feedback that you've had. We are discussing what you've shared with us so far. The other point, so we asked this question specifically of the engineers who have been looking at the river to confirm the assumptions around it. The Cascade Falls are at least 30 meters below the confluence of the forks. There's several river bends, sections of rapids, bedrock, and then a long run along the Gilpin area. And so the difference in elevation of the lowering of the falls, there's no backwater effect over that length that the engineers would have any consideration of. They basically said this is the difference in elevation and the difference in river flow. And the other issue that they brought up was unintended consequences. And so when a lowering of the bedrock sill occurs, there's the potential then that cut can start working its way upstream and start taking out further homes or highways or infrastructure, railroads that may be in that reach directly upstream. So it's like one of these, there's many ideas about how the river works, and it's always worthwhile to ask the people who can answer it, you know, tell me about this question, because it's worth asking the question, but it's from my understanding, not requiring further study.
Okay, but if you were to look at those pictures you have there, you're burning along, you're proposing to go along Granby, and just a little bit on the other side of Granby, or the Granby River on Riverside Drive. So to me, it looks like you're going to now cause a bottleneck for this. So the spillage for the water is not going to get through there as fast. So what's going to happen, in my opinion, is, and I'm not a hydrologist, but you know what, if you play in a sandbox with some water and stuff, you figure it out, I think, that you go back to the 80th Street, all the way along to about 75th, probably. I walked that berm every day for 14 days. Where I live, it was 10 inches, not even that. Right where I live, where the beach access goes down, it was 4 inches from going over Riverside Drive. So if we restrict the flow of the Granby at all, we're gonna end up flooding all the people on the Riverside Drive from 80th Street, and it's gonna run out behind the medical clinic somewhere.
It's actually an excellent question. So one of the next steps with the dike design and analysis is the floodplain mapping involves making a sophisticated computer model that can actually test what happens if you put a dike here and here, what would happen if you removed a dike here and moved it inland so that there's a setback as there is below Barberland. So part of the design is for setback dikes or floodway at the confluence so that it doesn't back up the area on Granby or the Kettle upstream of those areas. And that's also why looking downstream at further route for floodways is important. It's a really important question. Cumulatively, if you put a dike on every piece of floodplain, you would constrain the flow and cause quite often local impacts or directly downstream impacts, raising of water, increase of velocity, increasing erosion. And so the flood model is designed to evaluate that, and we'll certainly test the backup effects of other sets. Thank you for sharing that.
Will you put your post there?
My name is Bob Chapman. I live on 4th Street. Anyway, this seems enormous. What you guys have put out, and I appreciate the amount of effort, work, and you guys have done to figure this out. What if the government says we can't give you that much money? How do you prioritize what it is you want to do? Those are my first question. Second question is, if you're putting together this proposal, this ask for the $6 million, you must have an idea in your mind of how much you're going to have to give people to buy them out. So I'm just curious, because, talking to neighbors, people are incredibly stressed out about this. They're facing ruin and bankruptcy or whatever. Is there any way of letting people know sooner than later what they might have?
Okay, so the prioritization, I think it's a good question. We know there's a decision process among the funding bodies. Both the federal and the provincial governments are involved. We've submitted initiated 2 grant processes already that demonstrate merit and return on investment, and they also require a significant provincial match in order to be functional. So if the full amount of money isn't available, then we need to go back to the risk assessment and have that prioritization of risks, what areas are most affected, and are there interim solutions that will help meet people's needs for safety while some of the projects take time. So I can't answer for the provincial government on that process, but what I would expect over the coming weeks is a dialogue about specifically what further might be done in order to refine that, if not all the money is available right now. I think we could, if there's anyone from the province that could speak to the type of process that would be required, I'd welcome that, but maybe if you'd like to do that, we can get to the second part after.
This is Roly Russell. Disaster Recovery Branch.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah. Thanks, Graham. So, good evening. My name is Ron Burleson. I'm the Executive Director of the Provincial Disaster Recovery Branch. So, the province recognizes the truly catastrophic impact this flood has had on the community of Grand Forks and the surrounding area. We've been working directly with the city and the regional district throughout the response and recovery for this event. And to support community recovery, we've assembled a cross-agency team who you met a month or 6 weeks ago to ensure that we've got a comprehensive scope for recovery support. To date, we've been leveraging existing programs such as...
I got an interview here. We're going to get you in the spotlight.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're always happy to share the spotlight.
Can I start over? Okay. So I'm sorry to read this, I just want to make sure I capture what I wanted to say. So to date, we've been leveraging existing programs such as the Emergency Program Act and of course our Disaster Financial Assistance Program. And given Council's now preferred options, we are going to reflect on those and look at those specific recovery needs. This is the place that we've had to get to. And we need to continue to look at additional programs as well as the funding programs that Graham mentioned. So the first process is to look at what's currently available. So there's the federal Natural Disaster Mitigation Program, and there's the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, which is the provincial federal program. Then, if those aren't fully sufficient, then we have to go back and have a further discussion on those priorities. So the first step we had to get to was tonight. So that's where we're at for this evening. As Graham mentioned, we're continuing to have a dialogue, and the people in the deputy ministers and ministers are reviewing these actively right now, is what I can say.
So the second part of the question, see if I still have the bandwidth to remember, was on the timeline around the buyout and the financial components of what will be in there. So we know that a process like DFA affected people differently depending on their assessment. Assessment is a bit of a shotgun because some are higher and some are lower in terms of the value of their home. There's little kind of legislative guidance about how something like this works. What Council has requested, as identified, was that the fair market value and reflection in the investment in the home. In some cases, insurance and DFA help you get back or start getting back into your homes, and in other cases, you're really on the hook for a lot of stuff. So, assurance about what the process will look, I really cannot make any commitments on behalf of the government or from the buyout program, except to say that that dialogue about what's next there is happening in the really near future. There's a lot of expertise involved in designing that, and we'll be needing assistance from the province and outside experts in that work. And I'm hoping that process can answer your questions. I know you're still a little bit limbo right now, but I don't think we're in a position to make promises exactly how much people will be able to get in a buyout, and also what date it will happen. So I apologize for that lack of information.
Okay, first thing, I have a suggestion for the Housing Committee. The other day I spoke to Petra in the Housing Committee and asked if anybody had considered looking at the old seniors home on 78. What condition that is in, because there's tons of room there for a fair amount of families if it needs just a little bit of fixing up. Second is with the bio in South Ruckle. If we could even get South Ruckle up on the screen, it would be good. So my understanding that green blob that you called it is the area suggested for bio. The homes on the south side of 64th, is that just buying their backyard or buying their home? Which is that?
That's a good question. I'll deal with that first, but sorry, I was distracted by the technology for a second. Can you just keyword from the first question?
Well, the homes on the south side of 64th where the green.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So we'll start with that part and then we'll go back to the first question. So it's a good question, right? So if the home is habitable or maybe raised, there's some there that have minimal impact, there's some there that have fairly major impact. It's kind of site specific, but the lower lying back of the properties, it might be enough that they are simply prevented from being developed on and can remain agricultural purpose or whatever. It's a really good piece. The same thinking about Johnson Flats. If there are habitable portions of the property that are at lower risk and have access to the road, then the preference will be for those areas to remain. And so an option that's available, of course, for low-lying areas is you can covenant them against development, require building within a certain envelope, and but there's some site-specific work that needs to be followed up to see which property fits within which category. It's a great question. A hard line on a map doesn't represent the nuanced landscape. But back to your first question, before you asked that, and I got distracted asking about this, if you can remind me.
Was it about the housing?
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah, the old senior center on 78.
Yeah, is there anyone that can speak to that? Or I know there's been some discussion, but.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. We looked at that site this morning. We too think it's a viable option, and we're going to start our due diligence on it right away. We actually think it might be a property that we can get into play right away to meet part of that 88 household need by the time of the winter.
Okay, the reason I was asking about the south side of 64 is that if they were to be bought out, because I can easily show you at least 20 other properties that suffered major damage that are not included in that circle for the buyout.
Excellent point, and it's representative. We know there's many properties that had several feet of water where you couldn't elevate safely, so it's some additional work needs to be done on South Ruckle, absolutely.
Yeah, because really 7th Avenue is quite the divider for east-west. I'm on the east side of the street, I have 4 feet of water, my home is now demolished and hauled away. On the west side, our neighbors have about a foot of water. That's a big divider, and nothing there is included. And the north end is 65th as well. The other question about the survey is, there's so many homes that are still vacant in South Ruckle. Some of those people are living in other municipalities for the time being. How many of them actually responded to the survey? Because those people most affected that aren't here probably would have voted bio, but didn't have the opportunity because they're not here to check the bell off.
That's a good point. So in some cases there have been forwarding addresses at the mailing office to other addresses. We The survey was sent to landowners. I think, do you have the response rate for South Ruckle? Is it 70 to 80%, Kevin?
South Ruckle was about 7% response rate. I'd have to check the numbers, but it was a majority of folks that did respond to it.
But the 30% that didn't, most likely, can you tell, were they ones where the homes are vacant and they're not living there right now? Because that would
Were
have
they
a
not
big
there to
impact.
get the survey, or did they just not bother sending it?
Yeah, so the question was for the houses that may have been vacant, were they not represented by the survey because, and would they have had either a strong opinion one way or the other? I don't think we'll be able to say definitively what that is, but most of the time with surveys what happens is once you get over a certain number of people that have responded, there's usually a mixed bag through a population, and so it might swing one way or the other, but usually won't be that drastic a shift. I think it's safe enough to say with South Ruckle, given the responses, given how mixed it was, that even with additional participation, it would have remained a really mixed reaction to the buyout or dike question.
Well, it would have been mixed, but if you pinpoint who voted and who didn't, and then look at who didn't, maybe 25 of the 30% are the ones vacated homes, and that actually could have a significant impact on the result.
Yes, yeah.
Studied further and looked at those stats.
Yeah, so certainly if we had gotten it could have been one way or the other. Statistically, it usually ends up being more of the same trend rather than a drastic shift. But good point in terms of, yes, there were some gaps. The survey wasn't the only factor in decision-making of council. I don't know if Mr. Mary would like to speak to the decision-making process.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Council made a really tough decision yesterday. Probably one of the toughest ones we ever made. But the decision we did make was based on the fact for the future of this great community that we have. I mean, there's a safety element there. It wasn't easy, but we had to base it on our factual data and information we had. The survey was great. We really respected and appreciated all the comments. But at the end of the day, we still have to look at the factual because of the safety, as mentioned by Graham and by Director Russell. The safety is first and foremost for our constituents, and our constituents wouldn't want it any other way. We didn't take the cheapest route, we took the safest, because after having numerous conversations with our Premier John Corrigan, he wanted a permanent solution. We don't want a repeat of what has happened, such a catastrophic event that happened. We're into this 4 months now, almost, just shy of 4 months. And I know it's no consolation to most of you, but we are now finally arrived that we can give direction to the recovery team to get the operational aspect of this going forward so that we can come to resolve. No promises yet. We can't guarantee anything because it's always subject to the province. But the province wants a permanent solution, and they want a package that is, so to speak, shelf ready. Again, we didn't take the cheapest route, we took the safest route and the best route so that we can have an assurance that something like this will not occur again. Because we will be setting the precedent in BC. Because something like this, even by the own admission by the province and the ministers, has never occurred in BC. So we're going to be the poster child, so we got to get it right the first time. And I know a lot of you are concerned and fully understandable. Time is running away, but we're really, really doing the best we can. And we are looking out for all of you.
Barry Jarvis, lived down at Johnson Flats and was fortunate to have vertical damage. Graham, I'll pose this question to you. For this to go forward, is there a budget number, a preliminary number of the total required to buy out the number of houses that you have identified which is at this point well in excess of 100.
Excellent question. That actually goes back to part of the question somebody else asked from over here that I didn't fully answer, so I'm reminded about that now. What was used as an estimate for houses was looking at the assessment value, adding an error factor of, I think it was 15 to 20%, and then adding a legal and appraisal kind of contingency. And then on top of that, there was another kind of bubble added. So we don't have a precise number of homes that are necessarily going to be bought out. I think 100 is kind of a ballpark figure that I would expect that if we're able to go through all of North Ruckle, a portion of South Ruckle, a portion of Johnson Flats, and some other remaining areas, it's not a bad figure. But I don't have the number specifically on that yet. There's further work that would need to be done. It's part of the land acquisition costs and buyout costs that were part of the overall estimate, for sure.
Sorry, but you would have had to take a number somewhere.
We took the number by looking at the averages, average assessments in neighborhood and adding an error factor. In some areas, we would look at if there was any skew in the assessment. So some homes that were highly valuable also had little damage. So in some cases, it may be skewed upward. In other cases, it may be skewed downwards. And then adding an error factor because we know that the assessment isn't in the right spot.
So the round numbers, though, if there's 100 homes at an assessment or even fair market value of 250,000, 25 million bucks.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good ballpark. I think that's a little bit higher than what we have, but I think that's a good outside area.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for the hard work you've done up to now. I live at 7843 Riverside Drive. I've lived there since 1991, and this is the first year I've gotten water. Some factors: I have a neighbor with a basement that has 5 sump pumps, and he's pumping the water in my yard. The second one is the city installed a pit meter 11 feet into the dike. Guess where the water came out? Also, the alley behind us had 2 feet of water in it. So I'm a little bit concerned when I see you have that cutoff point for Riverside, because there's some huge issues, much to what Hank spoke about in that corridor from 78th all the way up to 80th. The water through there was absolutely terrifying. We were all evacuated, and I know you've got your hands full right now, but you really need to come investigate the really difficult areas. And I know I haven't lost my home, and my heart goes out to people that have lost theirs. These issues need to be dealt with. If you're going to do it right. Fix everything.
Thank you.
I have a question. For those of us who know we're in the wrong place, I'm wondering about the time frame. Now, you said request away for finances, and we have an idea of what they are. What kind of a window can we expect for a response? Now, there's some that are maybes in various different situations, but some of us are absolutely in the wrong place. Surely there must be some time frame that we can look at and hold on to, expecting someone to show up and do something.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. We've asked for that as soon as possible, as soon as the funding is confirmed and the process is designed. And we know that maybe the number of buyouts total is lower depending on which option. If there's prioritization that happens, there's still some homes that you're very, very aware of are require that. So I don't have a definitive window. We're asking for as soon as possible. I'm really hoping the buyout design can start in the next month, and that will be able to start dealing with site-specific properties in that position right away.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you guys for the chance to speak to me. Thank you for the mass amount of work you guys put in. I really don't know what your time can look like in overtime right now. My question, one of them was, and Kevin actually answered it, about the fact that North Ruckle is all going to be bought out and it's going to be floodplain. What happens when that floods, and how do we in South ice field to access town? Do we have to go all around? He explained that the road is actually going to be raised. That's the case, and how is that road going to be armored so that it doesn't get washed out?
Yeah, a couple of really good engineering questions. So starting with emergency access, both from our fire rescue services and also the operations folks have requested, that we put it in there for raising both 68th and 2nd. If anything were to happen at the highway bridge and during the flood, as we saw, water just about prevented that route from going. If anything were to happen there and we didn't have access to 68th and 2nd, then we'd definitely be in big trouble. So it's a good bypass route. So a 2nd Street elevation to still function as a floodway across that area would require some flood passage underneath, some more culverts, etc. You can kind of picture maybe a central channel and then some wetland areas that, depending on the type of flood, would go through there. So there's a lot of design behind that. But definitely, being able to access that road is critical. The other piece that we also looked at actually is we know how much water was going over the bicycle pathway. The water line is right behind that pathway from the community garden to the bridge. And so the dike alignment essentially could go along there and might not be able to take a truck, but certainly ATVs and emergency vehicles of smaller size. And, worst case scenario, there's a plan C.
That's good. Right, having a 26-letter alphabet. My other engineering question is regarding the dike in South Ruckle. I understand that was a split vote, and I'm willing to accept that. I voted for the mass buyout just so that we can have an end date to all of this. My house is down to studs, collapsing rafters, and worrying about falling through the floor, and we're trying to fix this. At this point, I think my house is probably one of the best built, or at least will be when we're done. There's talk about raising the houses in South Ruckle. How is that going to be done when you're going to have, I don't honestly believe, short of massive equipment and engineering and steel beams, that you're going to be able to lift these houses without them crumbling, quite literally. How is that going to work? I mean, half of the neighborhood is already being bought out with the sacrifice, green slab, whatever we're calling it, and the dike. And then you're going to have to lift these houses. From what I've read in the report, or the handout, is that the dike doesn't go all the way. Logically, I understand that if it's higher ground, it doesn't need to. Standing and watching my husband walk back into the floodable waters racing around my legs at 5 in the morning makes me a little skeptical and overly cautious. How does that work? I mean, obviously we need the housing. How are those houses going to logically be saved and still usable?
Yeah, it's a good question. So two questions in there. I'm not an expert at all in the elevating of houses. I've talked with a couple of homeowners who have already got quotes on what would be involved.
Would you like to come visit our house? We actually just finished raising it. I'd be more than happy to walk you through the process.
Okay, so what was your cost roughly for that process?
I am incredibly fortunate in the fact that I have family and friends that are able to do a lot of the grunt work for us. My uncle owns a mill, and through him we were able to get 5 massive timbers. We're talking 10 by 10 by 30 feet that we went under the house, and then those were raised with bottle jacks, and we swiveled the timbers then afterwards. The house was set on that. Once we poured and raised the foundation, about 40 inches or so, we basically let the water level above. Our costs, concrete, trucking in, timbers, and I think there was something else. We didn't have to pay labor costs, thank goodness, but we're about $7,000 for a 600 square foot home. And that's done unprofessional, right? If it's city within these houses, obviously it needs to be accompanied with insurance-based households in.
Thank you. So that's totally valuable information. Thank you. So I heard from another resident a quote that they had received for $30,000 for about a 1,000 square foot house, I believe.
That's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
When we bought our house, we had to get quotes for that.
Yeah, and so the estimate that the engineer used in the report was based on $40,000 to include some contingency. Now, some houses have additions, or some houses have a mixture of different foundation types or different concerns, and so there's site-specific evaluation to know if it's a good option. So I would look forward to that process to know if it's a good pathway, and it sounds like we found a solution there, so thank you for that. Now, the first question on the continuity of the dike, I think that the answer is like for a lot of the other questions, is once the floodplain map is and flood model is done, they'll be able to know exactly the correct alignment to prevent this or other extreme floods.
When can we expect that? Just, I mean, we're trying to plan our lives at this point and trying to find some direction. When
so I
expect some of those answers.
I know the expectation is rapid. The process takes multiple months of study. So right now, surveyors just finished completing cross sections in the river to look at the shape of the riverbed and how water interacts. They'll be building with that, between that and a new elevation model from laser altimetry or LiDAR. They'll be able to get the land surface, and then there's modelers will start developing, a complex computer model to actually evaluate all the options. I think that process takes through the fall. Yeah, that process kind of takes through the fall, and then after Christmas we'll be looking at scenarios. So both scenarios in terms of the climate change, expected hydrologic problems, that kind of thing, and then also scenarios about if there's a dike here, how does it impact that one? Should it be on this road or next to that bank? And that project, even though we want it to advance as quickly as possible, it's going to take 4 to 6 months before we kind of get to a good approximation of being able to test those questions.
Thank you.
Hello, I address this to Mr. Watt. I'm trying to get I live on the beginning of the Granby Road in a very low area, and you're raising the housings. You have a limit. You're talking 2 feet, 3 feet. Well, I'm looking at like 10 or 11 feet. Is there a maximum or a minimum so I can try to plan something for what I can do in the future? I have a building lifter coming this weekend just to give me some quotes and stuff. But I need a direction. Are they who's going to pay for this? Is the city going to pay for this, or I have to borrow money from the bank to pay for all this work?
So we're requesting funding for elevating of homes that are suitable to be done. So I would expect a site-specific evaluation to be able to tell you what that safe level is. I understand 8 feet, 10 feet is a big change. And some properties still might need to be brought in as well. On some properties, there's septic issues. So these different complexities have been identified. I don't think we have solutions yet until we know the scope of funding where we can say, yes, we've got assistance for the elevating of that home, because if it's feasible, that's a lot less costly than as long as it's safe. So coming back to the safety, it'll be behind a dike and an elevated road if those are funded. So a question of being able to make it habitable by having it above that backwater level is I think the kind of consideration that would be expected. So starting with getting a quote and then working through with us on the site-specific stuff. We're going to have case managers supporting the different pathways and the issues. We just can't tell you this weekend, go for it. But I think starting with the process of quotes is good.
So I should be looking at the concept of lifting my house over a buyout. That's just a direction I need.
I actually can't make that recommendation, but it could be a good option at your site, and I think it depends on what the estimate looks like.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Muriel Neal and South Ruckle. And we are, where that angle is. And when I left the last meeting, Graham, you mentioned that there was going to be a dike there. Last night, when we read on Facebook, there's going to be a dike in our area. And I thought I knew exactly what kind of dike was going to go there. It was going to leave our house protected. We are on the river. We're now seriously on the river. Severe erosion. And then about 10:30 last night, I see this bizarre line that goes along 66, turns a corner, right angle corner, and goes on 9th. Yes, you're going to arm the bank, but then you're going to put that setback dike there. That leaves us in between the bank and the dike. Not feeling good. I didn't sleep last night. So the water, if the next time the water comes in, I'm might not be around then, but if it comes in, oh yeah, it's going to hit the dike, and we're going to be in this great big swimming pool for who knows how long. We didn't even have a problem with flooding before. We just lost bank due to erosion. And there's 4 houses there that are going to have this, or in that area. We own 2 of them. So what is the logic of not simply, I mean, I realize Don Dobson, the engineer, isn't here, so perhaps you know Graham. What is the logic of not making that blue line, that armoring the bank, higher? And not having to worry about that ridiculously where our property will be worth nothing.
But thank you, that's, and I know you're not the only one losing sleep at night over these questions.
I bet you too,
huh? So if I could make these lines really blurry and squiggly, that would maybe help represent how preliminary they are. This is based on the concept that roadways in that area can be used as the dike itself, and that you know, it would be potential for access to be maintained to the properties on the outside. So, you know, the question came up about, would you be stuck in a puddle? Now, the land in that area, it affected basements mostly where they existed, and then kind of flowed around on the north side and the south side of it. So from a preliminary look at where the flood levels were, elevating a riprap bank to a dike side is something that had initial consideration, and I think will be studied in the design options. One of the big challenges is, from what I understand from the engineers, is that installing a Sandra dike against the river's edge is a massive engineering project involving everything from the fisheries end to the, you know, there's a whole bunch of in-stream stuff that go beyond simply what would be involved in armoring. So the discussion so far is that installing it against the river, in the river, was very problematic, and it should be set back to every degree possible. But I think, you know, this is the direction that's been set, but those options will be studied further for what's the cost-effective and efficient and effective approach there. So I don't think we can provide assurance. One thing that we heard from people is that could I remain for a period of time in an unprotected area? And there is an answer to that. That does depend. So I think that's kind of where that concept comes in, and there needs to be further dialogue. Right now, this is very conceptual, so start with that.
I just hope I'm not being naive again and trusting you like I did after last meeting. I like you, Graham.
Mistrust away.
I live in South Ruckle, and I'd like to know, who do we go see to find out if a property is being considered for buyout or if it's being considered to remain?
So that fine line hasn't been drawn yet. There needs to be further work on the exact risk levels of where the buyout would happen. But the first question that would be asked is how deep was the water around your home? Where did it come up to on the home?
Well, my basement, the livable part was 6.5 feet of water. And from road level, it was 6 feet of water.
So 6 feet of level into the above, like to the upstairs of the home?
No, the upstairs is separate.
Okay.
But the upstairs isn't finished, it's just an upstairs.
Gotcha.
So the basement was completely finished, and it flooded out a little over 6 feet of water, so it's destroyed. So if I have to raise the home, I have to raise it about 8 feet. So that's what I'm asking.
That's the type of information that will be considered, but that line hasn't been drawn yet. The next stage would be the site-specific kind of risk assessment. We've got some surveyor data. We know the water levels, we know the risks, but we haven't drawn the lines around the specific properties. Part of what we've asked for in the funding request is the capacity to be able to make those site-specific decisions and then support the households in the transition to what's next, if it's raising or if it's moving.
How long do you think it will take to do that? Because my insurance company wants to do some work, but if I have to lift my house.
yeah, we're in a terrible limbo right there now. So,
Okay.
Hello? Hey. I live in Johnson Flats, and the DFA money would not cover the damage my house sustained. And at this moment, it's not my house that concerns me because I'm an animal breeder. I have donkeys and sheep and horses. Now my fences were wiped out, the barn suffered severe damage. None of that is covered. Like, do I make plans to evacuate my animals for next spring already? Or will I get help protecting the barn?
that's a great question. So in the funding request, we identified some areas where water came into Johnson Flats, where berms, old berms were breached, and those have been identified in the flooding request, or in the funding request to support that. I can't commit to timelines, but one thing that we know is that any work that isn't in the stream itself, but is set back inside the riparian area or inside the top of bank, doesn't need to be done immediately this fall. It could happen as long as the ground can be worked. So, you know, if as soon as the funding is available and the appropriate design is done, you know, I think we'd be looking back at that area. In terms of protection around the barn and your buildings and the house itself, there's some site-specific follow-up that needs to happen there, and we need a bit more capacity to follow up with you, but we've definitely identified that as one of the hot spots to consider in Johnson Flats. So thank you.
I will just add briefly to that if you have livestock, you should have an evacuation plan for your livestock if you're in the floodplain.
I do.
Yeah, great. And that is also something for the regional response plan. It was on the work plan for this year. I suspect that our emergency teams have been a little bit busy, and so we might not get to it, but there is a regional livestock evacuation plan that was meant to be done around now this year, but it'll probably be next year. But it will not be a plan that assists necessarily with actually mobilizing livestock off of properties as much as defining how we ensure that those avenues are available to people.
Hello, I'm in North Ruckle. Just a question, is the disaster people still going to give us money to finish putting our houses together? We were encouraged to do so that we could have a place to go for winter. We borrowed money, expecting that money to come out. Now that we're being told that we're getting bought out, does the disaster people still carry on?
That's a good question. Is anyone here from DFA specifically?
It was.
Yes. Right. Okay. So I don't think we can answer. You can provide some
Good, you're here.
Well, I'm not from the disaster financial assistance.
Maybe I have a connection. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify, are you talking about the Household Emergency Assistance Program or disaster financial assistance?
The disaster financial assistance.
Okay. Yeah, I actually can't comment. I thought you may have been referring to the housing assistance. As far as DFA goes, we don't have anyone from that group here this evening. And I know that, you know, that's on a case-by-case basis, so I'm not sure what ongoing contact you're having with them.
Well, we were encouraged to go ahead and get a building permit and get our house back in order. I borrowed approximately $43,000 just to get us so we would have a place for winter, and now they say we're going to buy it. So.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I mean, that's something we'll have to talk about, and that will have to be part of the overall response to the request to the province.
That's great. I'll grab that. Rachel, did you have a specific information to share on that as well?
So if you haven't heard back from DFA, I'm going to give you a number to call them. Does anybody got a pen? Cal, if you want to see me after, I can give you that too. But the number is 1-888-257-4777. So if you haven't heard back from them, give them a call. Okay? One more time. 1-888-257-4777.
know why we're not talking about Almond Gardens at all. We've been flooded 2 years in a row. This year was devastating to the ceiling in the basement. We were sandbagged. The whole property was done. I'm living in an RV at my mother's place, and I don't know what's going on with this area at all. You guys haven't mentioned it once.
Yeah, I'll start. So Almond Gardens was identified in the report as one of the areas where properties were at risk. There's 2 properties specifically in that area where there was significant, and then others had some property level damage. There's several other areas as well in the regional district where this was similar, so in the rural areas of the regional district. So there's site-specific work on individual houses that face erosion, and then there's river kind of bend level work on what can be done. It's not specifically part of the within the city scope, but it is part of the regional district scope. So if there's individual properties where work can be done for protection or for elevation that affect the safety component, I think they are definitely part of that larger program. And they're, I think, a small part of the overall numbers, but we've got to make sure that we capture that. So we'll definitely make sure we've noted follow-up on the Almond Garden, and maybe part of the process here is further work with the regional district staff and Director Russell, Chair Russell, on the follow-up of the process.
No, that sounds about right. Yeah, I echo your concerns. I guess it's the bottom line. And, you know, we're going forward with the province to ask for financial assistance to alleviate concerns for individual homes in the municipality, then we need to be making the same request for that financial assistance given whatever criteria we use for the rural residents. And so that's going to be a bit challenging, I think, to figure out what that exactly looks like. And I think the distinction is going to be for the rural area, that we probably have the ability to do a more kind of individual process, to be able to talk to people. Like, for example, in Many Meadows, we already know from conversations that happened, you know, weeks after the flood, that some of those residents want to be gone and want to be bought out, and some of those residents want to remain. And so I would say for the rural area, we probably can try to accommodate those within reason, more straightforward in terms of being able to try to incorporate, like I said before, that expert opinion to say in some cases it doesn't matter what people want, it's unsafe, but in a lot of cases maybe there's an avenue to accommodate both the desire of the people and that expert opinion.
Good evening. I'm at the conference. Am I of the understanding that our mobile home park will be gone?
So the recommendation from the engineer in the direction of council was to provide a relocation for the mobile home park, to provide a new spot. Now the manufactured homes are relatively easier to move in some cases than a lot of homes. And so the feasibility of that option is followed up, will need to be followed up. That's the general recommendation, that a new site is located for that. So the bottom line is, being at the Forks and the amount of room on that property, there is no way to protect that property. And you know, there's a real challenge with trying to elevate without having any setback room with the location of the highway. So that was the recommendation of the engineer and the direction of the resolution.
Well, the mobile homes that are at that park now, the ones that were put in there to your code did not flood at all. They flooded, but not the mobile home. So we are going.
So what I'd like to just hear is that homes that are higher, the newer ones that were at the flood construction level, were elevated and weren't affected by this flood, and we'd like to see that option recognized. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. I don't want to lose my spot. I love my spot.
Thank you.
So why can't every trailer in there drop to that code?
We'll have follow-up discussions about this. I think it's important to recognize what you've said here, and we'll be talking further.
Thank you.
My question has more to do with concern for fellow members of my community in that it's getting cold. We're coming into winter. There's a lot of people who aren't accustomed to sleeping in camper trailers that are. Is there going to be provisions made for housing? Is there plans in place in the next month for people to have opportunities to still stay in town and still be part of Grand Forks and not have to move away to have shelter for the winter?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I think many people might be thinking about that. Two parts to it. First off, by winter, our goal is to get the 88 households that have identified an immediate need into safe, affordable housing for the winter time. The second part, and I really like how you asked your question, when we determine the long-term housing solution for people who are bought out or people who didn't have the right housing before the flood or who are identified through this process needing new housing, our focus is on building community. So that's going to be the priority, is how do we get people in the community, near amenities, near infrastructure that matters to them. That'll be our focus. Hope that helps.
I have a question. Is the city or the flood committee communicating directly with the insurance companies, or are the insurance companies just getting their information from the homeowners?
Thank you. It's a really good question. So, so far there's been information exchanges with the Insurance Bureau of Canada on at least 3 occasions, and then there's been information exchange with one of the adjusters about what the process is for the decision and potential buyout to talk about timelines. We need to, I think, increase the level of communication so that the process is clear, and we definitely welcome any concerns that you've had about what you've heard from insurance. We definitely want to open up that channel, so follow up with us please for any issues that are...
Yeah, right now they're just saying it's a very gray area because they haven't had to deal with this. I mean, usually they do rebuilding, not buyout. Yeah. So it's a case of whether they cover or don't cover. Or...
Yeah, and what I heard from talking with the adjuster concerned me in that if an engineer determines that a property isn't safe for habitation, that concern that caused that wasn't the insurable event. So they would be passing the buck essentially to the government in this case, from my understanding. So that was what I heard initially in this recent conversation, and we want to follow up with the Insurance Bureau of Canada and clarify.
Thanks.
One more question about South Ruckle. I understand that the dike takes a few years to implement. It's engineering, it's studying. You want to only have to do it once. I can't imagine when you guys not having flood protection in place for us next year. What does that look like?
That's a great question. Now, there's no one here from the emergency program on the response side. I could speak for what I know about so far is that we learned a ton from the last 2 floods about every neighborhood, every area. And so there's advanced planning that happens in the wintertime when there's snowpack levels. There is, as we have some more certainty about what a snowpack melt might be, there's work that can happen immediately kind of prior. And so part of the emergency management group's work this winter is to identify what pieces can be in place as early as possible. Part of that is communication and looking at what the response options would be and what tools are in place. And part of it is having plans ready to implement, engineering designs ready to implement, so we know how much it's going to cost and we can get the approval right away. Part of the problem, the challenge with this is that under the Emergency Program Act, you pretty much have to be coming right into the emergency before you can start spending some funding. We want to look at all available options for how we can advance that in preparedness as much as possible and install something that provides that protection in advance of that flood. So I would expect this winter, as we start to look at the snowpack levels, that we would be looking at those contingencies communication. David, do you have anything that you want to add as kind of the operational side of that?
I think you did a good job.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So what options specifically would work then for the South Ruckle neighborhood? Obviously, those big orange, what are they, tiger dams that were along the streets downtown. I can't see those working as well in our neighborhood with trees with private properties, fences, rocks. I think that could pose some challenge. What are the other ones that are being considered for us?
Sure, so I'm speaking outside of my expertise entirely, other than from what I heard that that fill for roadways is something to be looked at. You can move it in quite quickly. You know, at some places the tiger dams might be appropriate, but the road alignments of Como where it crossed, 63rd, 9th, 66. There's some really good, like where there's some specific low spots that happened, and that's what would be prioritized. So it doesn't help every single house, but not every single house that was along that front edge also flooded. It was more concerned about erosion.
And will that help prevent the ditch along the railway filling? Because that, unfortunately, is what flooded us. It wasn't. Yeah. Okay. It will.
Here's someone with real expertise.
Thank you.
All right. I was trying to stay out of it tonight.
I appreciate the sacrifice.
So just to be clear, we did get all the approvals and the permitting to go ahead and repair the dikes that we have in place so that they're at the preconditioned flood.
So our neighborhood without a dike, what would next year's flood prevention look like?
Right, as Graham was speaking to, we learned a lot this year on certain areas where we would, I guess, monitor on a regular basis and be able to put some materials or some temporary flood protection works in place, but that is limited to the funds that we have and I guess the province's willingness to kind of be preemptive.
Okay. My daughter, this is in regards to South Ruckle as well. My daughter's right at the entrance to South Ruckle. And we got word from 3.5 months ago, the building inspector said, yeah, sure, rebuild, go ahead. So we have pushed and pushed, and now they're saying that she possibly could be part of the buyout. I mean, we think we're a few weeks away from her moving back home to her home. What? You're going to go site by site and now tell us something different?
That's a really, I hear your concern there. And so the first priority of the process is making sure people have a safe place to stay this winter. The instruction was that if they can get it back into a condition that's safe, warm, and dry, the insulation's back in place and it's a safe place to be. That was the first priority because we don't know, A, what level of funding is available on the buyout, B, how long it will happen, and it may be a staggered process that doesn't affect every property equally at the same time, as what was brought up from the resident here who spoke about the certainty that could affect his home. So with that knowledge, the building inspector did encourage, if there's repairs that can happen, you can get in before the winter. That was the message. The other message is keep the receipts, because in the buyout process, recognizing if there's personal funds that went into that, that should be recognized. If there's whatever resources that were in, there's an individualized recognition there that we need to follow up on. So providing for housing currently, critical. Looking forward to the transition. If it's required at that site, we'll continue working with you on that.
And so then you're just going to go door to door and reassess this?
Yeah, there would be engineers involved in that site level work.
Thank you.
Yeah, this gets back to, I'm Dan and I live in North Ruckle. I have flood insurance. Now, since the flood happened, my insurance company has done very little. They've got it, they've taken all my possessions out of the house, but they seem to have disappeared. And I expect it's because they were waiting for a decision to be made, and you kind of alluded to it, that they think they can walk away. Now, I was not qualified, anybody that had insurance for any disaster relief. So in essence, I'm in worse shape than people that got money from disaster relief. I don't have a house that I can live in right now. I purchased a trailer with my own money, and I'm sitting there. My house needs to have heat in it, so I have access to water. I'm lost for words at this point. I thought I was going to get, they had promised me a rebuilt house, and up until this decision was made, I thought that's the route that I was going to have. And right now, I feel like I'm kicked in the butt. I don't know where to go with this thing. And you know, I've been on the phone all day today with a lawyer, Insurance Corporation of Canada, and I'm not getting any answers. So I hope you can address this. I've tried to get some answers a couple times now from you.
Yeah, I hear that, and this is a really pressing need now that this direction has been identified. If there's, I think we need to look for support from higher levels of government in dealing with some of the insurance matters, perhaps. If there's an unmet need and no recourse through insurance, we need to recognize that in the recovery housing so that you can have a safe place and you know, and whatever level of compensation is required. The buyout process is a little bit independent of that. I recognize you're definitely in limbo because of the insurance, so that's part of the follow-up conversation. It's definitely critical, and we'll make sure someone from the team follows up with you.
Hi, I'm Dawn. I have questions regarding Southern Johnson Flats. So I understand that there is an ask being put in from the city. Southern Johnson Flats is a mix of rural and city, especially the southernmost part is rural, and the western and eastern parts more are city. So my question right now is, what protective measures are going to be put in there? That's where a significant amount of water came in. And I'm wondering about what's going to be done to protect people and property and animals for the spring.
So I can speak a little bit to that. In the hydrologist report, that did capture those properties in the southern end of Johnson Flats that are included in the regional district and not the municipality. And included in that was recommendations regarding a certain amount of shoreline armoring on that southern portion. I don't remember if there was other mitigative, there was berm or diking. So those pieces, as far as I understand, you know, I don't have entire clarity yet in terms of what exactly the City Council released, but that hydrology report, one way or another, will all be public very soon. It has never been in camera for the regional district, and that piece then would articulate what those recommended measures were for that southern portion. Again, recognizing that that then means partly that goes into a consolidated request to the provincial government, and it also partially means that then the rural areas, so those rural residents, we have to negotiate in terms of what the desire is and how that meshes with that expert opinion from both the hydrological engineer and planning recommendations.
Okay, so is it a few weeks, or when would we know more about what the plans are there for the properties that are affected?
Well, I would look to the city. The city has made a decision. The regional district of the hydrological report was in camera at city conversations, so it was not released from the regional district for that reason. So if the city has made a resolution, which I understand was made last night, to release that report, then that report will be public imminently, and that will identify. It is.
So the report, for anyone who would like it, is up on the bfre.ca website.
It's under the infrastructure update. Look for the river study in red and you can download it. It's about 55 pages and it's up there. So it has been released. There are some limited number of copies here tonight, which may have all passed out already, but there are some copies up at the table that you passed as you came in. And so it's been informed they're all about, so please go to the website for that report, or you can always go to the library to get help printing it out.
And I will reiterate that for the rural residents in my area, in Area D, that those conversations, we have the flexibility to be able to have those conversations with those residents, given the number of properties that were impacted, and so those decisions will be made shortly. But if there are opportunities to provide assistance that were comparable, that request would be the same, right? The timelines and when they would be implemented would also be similar, right?
I know that some of the city properties that are just north of those properties would be affected by the decisions just south of them on the river. So to know what the recommendations are, we're to read the report. Is that, if we want more specifics, is that correct?
My understanding is the cities has adopted those recommendations as that hydrological engineer presented them. And so you will see all of those recommendations articulated in that report, and the same report identifies the recommended options for the rural part of Johnson Flats.
Thank you.
Okay, Muriel again, from South Ruckle. Back in, it must have been late, probably early June, the premier was at our property. I think I'm on a first name basis with the guy now. And Roly was there at the same time, and you witnessed it, right? He said, Muriel, we'll fix this for you. And I told him, it has to happen this fall. So I heard that, I told him 4 times. And Ray, did I understand that it can't happen until later, probably till March, armoring of the bank?
There's site-specific work that can happen, but what I've heard from the engineer about the length of time required for the permitting and for in-stream works makes it, this window for installing it this fall for protecting that bank is over. So we're looking at a couple of options in that area, but
okay, because Mr. Horgan, John, told me that I said, if this doesn't work soon, I'm going to be the squeakiest wheel you've ever encountered. You know what he told me? Squeaky is good. Okay? So now I want to know, what department am I going to be squeaking to? All right, so let me read this. So I hope there will be many others of you squeaking. No. Let's see. Oh, Ron, am I actually speaking to you or to the Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resources? Can I speak to you?
You can, yes. Yeah.
So will you come to our place tomorrow?
Well, let's talk after this.
We'll talk after this. Yeah, I don't take no for an answer. I'm worried.
All right, and with just a few minutes left in the scheduled time, any conversations that can be held individually after, we'll definitely try and schedule in for the near future here.
Can I ask one question that's not related to people losing their house, things like that? I'm looking at this map and I'm seeing an awful lot of territory that's going to be questionably inhabited. In the paper, it did say that ATCO trailers could possibly be coming. If this is true, where are you going to put them?
Yeah, ATCO trailers were one of the ideas we floated early in June. It was one of the original ones. In many other flooded municipalities, ATCO trailers have not ended up being the best solution.
Having said that, we still have it as an option in our housing plan right now. But it would be, I guess we haven't made a determination on areas, but we do have a few in mind, and we can come up with areas fairly quickly. That's the best I can tell you right now. We have other options that we think are better, more viable for people who need housing, but aqua trailers are still on the radar.
And can I just add to that? That's one of the pieces that I think both the province and the flood response team deserve some appreciation for, is that would have been a very easy win for the province to be able to say very early on, we're going to send 60 units of temporary housing into the community. And that would have checked a lot of boxes. It would have been satisfying for Oregon to be, standing there saying, we're delivering aid immediately. And it was our desire locally not to, because of those challenges with that in a long-term sense, and that took some patience on the part of the province to be able to step back from that, and a lot of creativity from the team leads and the flood recovery team. So I think that is an important thing to recognize, that there was a lot of work that went into not ending up in a situation that could have turned into a really problematic state in the future.
Yes, I live on 4th Street, second from the dike actually, and one of the first meetings we went to, they said there was like 8 feet of water, but actually it was less than 3, and most houses in our immediate area are okay. A couple of the older houses that were built really low were really damaged, but the rest were fine. Is there any chance that people are going to be able to stay in North Ruckle at all, or is that a question completely? Like, we would love to stay there, and so would a lot of our neighbors.
I don't know if you want to speak to that, or you can talk about the technical side of it. Sure.
Unfortunately, as I said earlier, it was a tough decision, but the resolution and the recommendation stands and speaks for itself. I know it's not probably popular to a lot of residents, but in the overall scheme of things, we have to think of all of the constituents at the particular time. And again, it was factual based. It was not something that, we deemed out of passion or from the heart. This had to be a tough decision made based on factual engineering decisions. And again, as I've said many times, I'm sure we're not going to please all the people all the time, but we do try our best to, as an overall concept, to get the community going again and Grand Forks to be bigger, better, and stronger.
That's great. So I think that's an important place to start, is that the resolution and the recommendation from the engineer spoke about the total buyout for the area, because the totality of issues that affected it. We know there's some site-specific spots that weren't as heavily hit. And so a remaining small area with minimal protection was a real challenge from a safety perspective. And that's the bottom line that's been recognized again.
And if I could just weigh in, there's also the psychological aspect. If we have a fractured community, that doesn't wear well for those constituents that will be staying in that area. That's one of the other elements that was decided on also, just so you're aware.
It's just that some of the other areas you're going site-specific, but in that area, I guess that's not going to happen.
I think that when the majority of the neighborhood couldn't be site-specific, the majority of the area had it, so such little part would remain that would be definitely disruptive. Now, I did have a conversation with our housing team today, which kind of gave me a pause thinking about the future. A lot of you have expressed how much you value your homes and being in your homes and the work that you put into it and your connections there, your neighbors, etc. So what does a future vision for your future homes look like? What parts of the community, being close to downtown, having certain kinds of views or yards or being close walking path to the river, to parks, to downtown amenities. One thing that the housing team will be requesting is to start thinking about what that transition looks like and visioning for what that future looks like, because sometimes it's really hard decisions, and then there's how do we walk towards tomorrow. So I was so thrilled to hear that from the housing team that I look forward to seeing where they take that conversation.
Hi, my name's Ray Morass. We live down in Johnson Flats. If you look at that goose egg that you drew there, right at the bottom tip of it, on the west side is my house, of that little tip. If you go directly to the river from that little point, the levee broke. It let 300 feet of river, 3 to 4 feet deep, come across the flats, right down my driveway, right past my house. Luckily, we built it a 200-year floodplain. So I sat there in my robe with my coffee cup watching all of my neighbor's stuff float by. This plan does absolutely nothing to protect my property, anybody from 12th to the river, all the way down to the bottom of the flats. I don't see any shoring. All those levees there are man-made by the locals that are 40, 60, 80 years old. The only reason I feel somewhat safe right now is that we put in 80 4x4x4 sandbags ourselves, flipped the bill ourselves. About 30 of us community members got together and did it in 2 days. So we protected 300 feet, but there's a lot more that's not being considered. I feel like myself and a lot of my neighbors south of me are being thrown under the bus on this point.
So thank you. So the goose egg is I think a good representation of the level of analysis that says specifically where homes can be protected and where homes should be bought out. The circle is drawn because here's an area, a low-lying area of high risk. So one of the discussions was how do we allow the floodplain to have some function, and is there a levee next to the river, or is there a levee inland? Is 12th Street part of the levee? How far north does that levee extend, and what homes would be protected by it? Those are very site-specific decisions. The flood model will be able to evaluate, both the risks remaining on the northern part and then where that line is drawn. So I really recommend, you've got a great deal of uncertainty here, and you're not hearing how this solution will work for you yet, and that was definitely reflected in the survey results as well for Johnson Flats. So expect further dialogue based on the analysis, but until we get that flood model, we can't talk about specifics. I think what you raised is really valid, very, very important point.
So just quickly then, how are you basing the cost estimate when you don't know what you're doing?
The cost estimate is basically, you look at the number of homes in the very low-lying area, you draw a larger circle to that low-lying area and put that as an estimate. It's a ballpark, there's contingencies in it. It could go smaller, it could go larger. Some homes also may be defendable and have access to a high road. The next door neighbor property might not be. So there's site-specific work that needs to happen before we get to the detailed costing.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Melissa McClooney, and I live in South Ruckle, at the south end of 9th Street. And I have two questions. The first one is for my neighbor who had to leave. They live on 63rd. And on a previous map that we had been shown, the proposed dike would have extended further south. If you look, the old oxbow really kind of came across that field and across Como by 62nd. And now this map shows that the dike would only begin at about 63rd. So I'm curious about that. And secondly, I thought we had heard somewhere along the way that there were plans for some temporary work to be done shoring up along you see how much snowfall? So I'm kind of confused about that, and the work that was done at the swimming pool seemed to be too little too late, and from what I heard, they had an equipment malfunction, and they stopped it kind of halfway. It didn't even finish. There's boulders up in the former parking area that I think were intended to be put down where the beach, the swimming pool, that was never even finished. And some of the neighbors are concerned with that back eddy, that the way those boulders are, that will cause further erosion to come south on the southern end of that swimming pool. So I'd like to have that addressed if possible, please. Thank you.
I'll address the second part of the question. So the funding and the project that was in play was done under the emergency response, and it was to address erosion throughout that area. Of course, with the freshet, we saw that, yes, that erosion was severe and did happen. The trouble with access to emergency funding is that it's great when you're in the emergency, but without that imminent risk, it disappears very quickly. So we started the project, and what actually happened with the equipment was that the flood came, and they needed to essentially pull up, because I don't know if you're in an area when it was flooded, but that excavator was pretty close to the water, and so they weren't able to operate during the flood. So after the flood, essentially the imminent risk was not there, and the funding was also not there to complete the project. So it is on the books, and we are trying to find alternate sources of funding, but the source of funding that started the project isn't there anymore, so we're not able to proceed.
And there's further engineering and permitting and in-stream components that are tough to do right now, and were barely doable during the emergency. So there's the challenge of that type of work. Now, going back to the alignment, remembering it is preliminary. The first line that we saw that extended further south was a general recognition that down there is a height of land. So where the water came in the beach area, and then also further north towards the rail grade, those two locations are where the dike would essentially need to be the highest above the existing ground. The exact site can't be determined until all the surveys and models are done, but this essentially illustrates what the intent is to try to establish that protection with as little disruption as possible on an alignment that is feasible. So if the height of land is adjacent to the house that's south of the south end of 9th Street there, and extends just up the riverbank from there, and then extends out along 9th from there, and if that alignment is determined by the flood model to be effective and successful, then that would be kind of one of the options for the final design. There's a ton of work to do before we get there. What the idea is that if we can try to lightly around some of the existing homes as much as possible, and also respecting the river processes of needing a setback deck where possible, then that's the preferred alignment by the engineer.
And just to build briefly on some of the points that Kevin was saying, that there was the provincial government engaged in a study about flood and fire response over the last winter, basically. And that was one of the outcomes there, and one of the pieces that politically we were certainly trying to negotiate is making it clear that a little bit of investment is, it's that once we're in response, the purse strings are wide open, and it would save a great deal of money if we were able to invest a little more in both preventative kind of mitigation works in advance, and now as we were talking about the recovery process. So that's one of the political pieces that we're trying to talk about with the provincial government, particularly about making it more straightforward. It would save a great deal of money and a great deal of suffering if we were able to invest more.
Yeah. That's where I'm squeaking. My name is Barbara McClellan, and I live in South Ruckle, the corner of Coma 166. I was in a position like the fellow that was on Riverside, where the water was running to his home.
My neighbors were pumping water about 2 weeks before my pumps even started, and the water flowed straight to my place because I'm on low ground there. My house, I'm sure, is going to have to be raised at least 2 or 3 feet, and I'm wondering if that property is in consideration for, or who can I speak to
That's a great question. So we don't have the answer on the specific properties again, but as part of the funding request is that capacity for site by site, making that determination. Now, if it's a matter of a few feet, and also if there's improvements that can happen around drainage or site leveling about the how the runoff happens around the house site, then that is something that might be really feasible for that property. So we're looking for those site-specific solutions, especially where, like in South Ruckle, it might not be the whole neighborhood, it's portions. And thank you for bringing up about the water and impacts of flows from certain people pumping. There's drainage areas in various parts of the city. So part of the recovery plan is anywhere we're looking at interventions. We also need to look at improvement, how to get the water out without flooding people's remaining homes.
I noticed a lot of it had to do with the roadways, how they, yeah.
Just follow up.
Thanks.
My name is Nora Thurston, and I live with Dave Soroka in North Ruckle. And I just wanted to make a comment about the idea that developing a possibly more measured approach to North Ruckle's situation that allowed for some people to stay and some people to go, the idea that that would create a fractured community is a problem, whereas obliterating our neighborhood and really kind of necessitating some of us moving to other towns is not fracturing our neighborhood. So that's just a comment. The other thing I wanted to say is that my neighbors got my back, and I got my neighbors back during the flood, and we became tighter and closer than any neighborhood I've ever lived in. And I find it very, very unsettling to feel that closeness is being disregarded. And I'm wondering, okay, that's just commentary. But the question would be, if funding should fall short of a complete buyout for North Ruckle, would there be an option for a more integrated approach? Or is it really decided that North Ruckle has to go in order to protect the downtown and create an overflow? Is that really the underlying thing? Because I don't personally feel like I'm being protected. I feel like maybe I love my neighborhood and I love my neighbors, and I feel like that's just not being added into the equation, that's all.
Thank you. It's definitely recognized. I did want to actually pass, there's a comment from Paul Edmonds here who, I know he's got significant experience in the devastating effects of floods in multiple communities where there were these buyout decisions and how it affected. So I just wanted maybe a little bit of thoughts about how that decision is discussed, and then I don't know if there's any follow-up comments from Lee about community design or Emmeline from community design approaches, at least what can be taken. So I don't want to go into a large essay here, but just a couple of quick comments would be good.
Hello, good evening. My name is Paul Edmonds. In 2012, I dealt with the recovery of part of UK from 3 100-year storms, one week after another. And part of the federal buyout actually looked at 2 parts of the street. One had around about 3 to 4 feet of water in the living space, with no basements. The other side was completely dry. The federal buyout was actually for the whole area, because we saw that as part of the floodplain, and we actually understood the river would erode that area in the future, so we're trying to look at the longer term effects and the consequences.
I'll just add a little bit, Nora. Your husband, Dave, was one of the first people that I met
when I came to Grand Forks, and one of the first stories that I heard, this sounds funny, there we go. And so when you talk about the importance of community, that is not lost on us. And when we think about solutions, we think about locating people where community already exists and moving people together, and really having solutions be born here in Grand Forks from you, because no one else is going to come up with a solution that better meets your needs than yourselves. So that sentiment is something that I hold dear in my heart, and I know that Lee does as well, and why I feel so comfortable coming into this recovery team, because everyone here does as well. So keeping people together and honoring the integrity of community social fabric is at the forefront.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm from Almond Gardens, and I'll share many of the concerns that other ladies spoke of. And also, the gentleman from Riverside shared some of his concerns that you're going to create a bottleneck and force water upriver. So I guess my question mainly is for Roly. Would you be considering having some meetings for those of us in the rural areas that are impacted by this?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you put your hand up, because I still don't see who's talking? Oh, there you go. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So part of my challenge prior to the release of this hydrological report was that I didn't want to call a meeting specifically for rural residents if we didn't have any new information to talk about. So I'm certainly happy to entertain that now, and also want to reiterate that this process is agnostic of political boundaries, right? So this meeting is for everybody. Clearly, like tonight and a couple of weeks ago, the majority of the focus is on the city, what's going on within the city, but we can certainly have more focused meetings outside, specifically for affected residents.
So thank you, everyone. A lot of people have told me with their feet that we're over our 8 o'clock deadline here. So we are at about, I think, 1/4 after. And I've gotten through a lot of questions. I know there's only about maybe 3 of the people left in the room. So thank you for everyone who has stuck it out right to the end. We will be having another community meeting in a couple weeks, same time, same place. And Roly would like to add to what I'm saying. Roly.
Yeah, of course I would. Again, you've heard me say before, but even though we don't have a bunch of the flood recovery team up here presenting to you on what's going on with either the environmental pieces or some of those economic pieces and so on, those other aspects of this team have really been working tirelessly, and that's the risk in this locally driven process, is that it's a really thankless job, I would say, to be doing a lot of that. So I would like them all to stand up, so that recovery team can stand up, and the provincial representatives here as well can stand up, and we could give them a round of applause, because they're working very hard for you.
Is this on? Just really one real quick point, and I should have made it earlier. Section 11, we will have a specialist from the Cranbrook office here next week. If you have any in-stream works that you're interested in getting more advice and maybe do an application, look on the website. We will have information there Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, next week. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks again, everyone. And that website was bfre.ca. And the fellow telling you about it was Jim Vito from the Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. I think it's 6 words now. Anyhow, as always, I will encourage everyone in their discussions, if you could please have them outside so that we can let the folks at the back here who are running the theater close up behind us. So thanks again, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.